This is a game, Polgar against Kasparov, that was played in 2002. It shows one of the interesting ideas in the Sveshnikov variation. So Polgar was playing with the white pieces, and the game quickly ended up in the Sveshnikov variation of the Sicilian defense, which Garry Kasparov had only played in the end of his career and only very few times, but the few games that he played with it, he was pretty successful with this line. I had also looked at one game with where Black played bishop to e6. There was one in great style by Larsen, but in this game Kasparov went ahead with the main line with b5. I had also looked at a few in some other videos. I had looked at a few games where white goes knight to d5, which is a more positional option if white wants to do that. But Polgar is more aggressive player, so she decides to immediately ruin Black's pawn structure with bishop to f6, and Black takes back with a g pawn, and now white puts the knight on d5. Kasparov plays bishop g7, and here white has a couple of lines. One other line I looked at was played in the game between Anand and Kramnik, but in this game we ended up in this line where white is kind of waiting for things to happen in the center, and he's not taking on f5, he's not like reinforcing the position, and he's just finishing the development of the queen side, and he's ready to play a4. So Black has to do something about it, and one of the options is what Kasparov played in this game, which is to shut down the center to somewhat relieve the pressure against the white pawn on e4. But in return what he gets is a space advantage on the king side. And after f4, it's pretty clear that white's play is going to be against the weak pawns that Black has on the queen side, and white's play is going to be mostly and Black's play is mostly going to be on the g file. So he's going to put the queen and the rook on that g file, and it's going to be really sharp. So white carries on with a4. Black has to take usually, and now he puts the queen on g5. And here the latest idea is not to play f3 too soon and to leave the f3 square for the pieces to potentially defend g2. But this game was played 10 years ago, so at the time there wasn't as much detail known about this position. So Polgar just went ahead with playing pawn to f3, and the idea is that when Black attacks g2, white should be able to defend it along the second rank, like with the rook or with the queen, or something like that. But this approach has a couple of flaws, and one is that, well, this diagonal gets weakened a little bit too soon, and Black immediately transfers the bishop to that diagonal. Well, he prepares to transfer it there, and it can come there. Well, it would normally seem that the b6 square is the best square for the bishop, and then it's going to be putting a lot of pressure on the white pieces from that square. But as it turns out, there's other ways for Black to get the bishop on that diagonal, and that was something that Polgar had underestimated. She went ahead with bishop to c4, and she kind of assumed that I'm guessing she assumed that she was going to take on d6, and that's why it's a bit surprising that after Black just ignored the attack against the d6 pawn, it's a bit surprising that she didn't take on d6. That would have been probably most logical. And had she taken on d6 now, it would have been kind of complicated, because then Black would play rook to d8 and possibly invade on d2, but still this wouldn't be so clear, because Black's own back rank would be kind of weak, and he would have to watch out for mate coming to f8 once the rook is gone. and like his pieces are a little bit loose here as well. So this would have been probably most logical, even though it would be pretty dangerous. In the game, she went with rook to f2, and as it turned out, this was a little bit too slow. So still, bishop d8 probably isn't good due to queen to d6. So say if something like this, while then maybe queen here would be stronger than in the previous line, because there's no rook d8. That's one possibility. Maybe she was hoping for something like this, but it turns out that instead Kasparov simply played bishop to e7, and this seems to just protect the pawn, but it actually has a very nice hidden idea, which is again to still do something about activating the bishop, and this is what White underestimated. So she went knight to b4, and it seems like she does have all the time in the world to put that knight on d5, and black is just going to be shut down because of that weak square. But Kasparov had completely different idea in mind, so he sacrificed the pawn by playing d5, and that serves a very important purpose of potentially activating both bishops. But in the meantime, most importantly, this allows the bishop to come to c5, which would pin the rook, which is crucial for defending g2. So not only black is going to win the exchange, he's also going to make it very difficult for white to defend g2, and now, as we'll see, that's going to decide the game. So white has to take, so she took with the bishop, which is also seeming very deadly because this attacks the rook on a8. But Kasparov just played bishop to c5, and he's completely ignoring the pawn. Now he's also ignoring the rook, and he just wants to go for g2. And the surprising thing is that it actually works. So white took on a8, and now black again just carries on with his plan. Now mate is threatened on g2 with queen to g2 because the rook is pinned. The important thing is that queen to f1 doesn't work because black just brings another piece to attack g2. That's the idea, and once g2 falls, you know, this king will not survive. So after rook g8, white just decided to admit that while she's losing g2 pawn, and after king f1, she also had to admit that while once black takes on f2, she also doesn't have time to take on f2, so she's just losing the full rook back, and the white king is also getting completely exposed. So the crucial thing is, of course, well, what if she takes, right? Well, then black takes here, only square is king to e1, but then black has a couple of options. One is to give this check, and after this to give another check, and then to win the queen. And the important thing is that, say, when something like this happens, black also gets the pawn on f3, and then the f pawn is going to run. And not only black has material advantage, he also has a decisive threat of advancing the f pawn. So what happens? Well, what happens is that in this position, white can't really afford to take on f2, but there's really no solution for her anyway. So king e2 was played, and black took on g2, and now the f pawn pretty much falls anyway, just a bit later. The king has to run. Sorry, the bishop comes to this very important square, cutting off more squares from the white pieces, and in this position black has extra pawn, 2 bishops, and white's king is completely exposed. So the rest is kind of like a bit of like autopilot, in the sense that black is winning easily. Now he won a pawn, and he just threatens to win more material with bishop to f1. Again, the bishops are just completely devastating here.
And even though white kind of manages to exchange queens here, it doesn't really help. I mean, black doesn't have to change queens, but it's just the simplest way to win here. So he took on c2, and after the exchanges of queens, he played king g7. Now this pawn is good to go. If he wants to, he can win the f pawn, and that's also going to win the game, which is what happened. So white's pawns aren't really going anywhere. So Kasparov decided that he will, well, like he'll go for the f pawn advance. And in this position, black is also up a piece, so the win is completely simple. And in this position, so white resigned. So a very interesting game. It shows some of the typical ideas for black in the Sveshnikov line of the Sicilian defense, and the key moment definitely came at this point when black played pawn to d5 and activated the bishop, and it turned out that his attack along the g file is just completely winning here.